Oh no! Once again, we're having
Joe,
difficulties.
I've got a line across my face.
We we're gonna start. There we go. Uh, we're having live technical difficulties every time, but this is all part of the fun, right? Um, welcome everyone to the third Art and the Heart Live, and today I'm joined by James Popsys. Um, first of all, let me know if you can hear us, and James, introduce yourself, say hello, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. Um, I am a photographer from the UK. I don't really know what else to say about myself, really. I have a YouTube channel, much like Joe, uh, and it's good to be here. Although, whenever anyone says it's good to be here on a podcast, you always kind of assume that they're in the room, say a podcast or in this case, a live video. But yeah, I'm in my own office, as has been the case, I suppose, for the majority of the past year. So hopefully that's not the case soon and we can do things like this in person.
It's a fine looking office, by the way. I was just saying beforehand, I'm admiring the blue tones that you've set up and painted, and I feel
Uh,
like you've taken a similar route to me of just spending time just perfecting your sort of studio space and everything, getting it all good and running.
yeah, most of the things I do are just copying you, to be honest. But this wall behind me, viewers of my channel will know that this wall, we've lived here about 5 months, and the wall behind me has had 12 coats of paint in three different colors now. So the wall is actually just slowly moving towards me. You know how they say tectonic plates are moving at like the pace of a fingernail? This wall, I think, is moving faster. So never mind. I used to have a bigger office, but thanks to 3 weekends of painting, I don't anymore. Never mind.
Have you hidden any messages in between? You could put like some, I don't know,
that,
propaganda artwork up and all sorts
that would
of.
have been an idea. Yeah. Well, never say never. I mean, clearly, we're 12 coats of paint in, and we've only been here 5 months. So I suspect there's going to be more painting done on that wall. So it's not too late.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, that is definitely a good thought though. Add in some timelines of things, generate a whole 100-year history in the space of the next 2 months, um, and either try and predict the future or cause some head scratching when you eventually move out and someone else decides to peel back all these layers. And they'll look at the
Quite,
plans and
yeah.
say, "I thought this was a 2 meter room. We've only got 1.5 meters. What the hell?"
Yeah, they will get the original blueprints of the house, not the updated ones.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, do let us know in the comments if you think you've got any ideas of what can write on the wall. Keep it clean,
Yep.
please. But yeah,
Anyway, so this is a fairly soft opening into my live streams. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't get to get my technical videos, but we will save that for a future week as we're having fun experimenting and playing around and setting some things up here. I just had once again some audio technicalities with you, James, coming through on a digital signal to me via a Toslink cable and then sending an analog signal somewhere else. And it was just causing a time sync and I wasn't happy with it. So, aside from all that technical stuff, um, let's get into a conversation. So, the idea of these streams is that we can have a 30-minute chat or so discussing various topics of creativity. And week by week, I want to introduce various people that I'm inspired by and the types of people who are creating things for all the right reasons, creating it because they have a passion for the creativity and sharing the art and the heart. And James, your work in particular. So if you don't know James, he's a YouTuber, photographer, has a very similar kind of background to myself, actually. Um, but your work in particular really inspires me to go and shoot in the UK. So you're based in, I want to say North Wales. Is that correct?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Uh,
if you look at a map of the UK and you see the North Wales coast, we're pretty much slap bang in the middle of that coast. Yeah.
nice. Very rugged part of the UK, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife and I were lucky enough to grow up here. So we've been able to move back. Luckily, neither of us need kind of jobs in the city anymore. We used to have that. We don't anymore. So it's enabled us to move back. And naturally, as a photographer, kind of outdoors photographer, living somewhere like this that's both on the coast and close to mountains has its advantages. So after years of pestering Emily to let us live here, she kind of buckled, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been fun. It's obviously, for obvious reasons, I've not been able to be out as much as I wanted to be so far this year. But I'm hoping that's all about to change. I'm trying to make up for lost time at the minute, so I'm trying to go out pretty much every day, come rain or shine. And
Yeah.
it's just nice to be outside.
Definitely. You are definitely an outdoors person. I think you've got it listed in various places that you are outdoor preferred, and just, if you're outdoors, that's where you're happiest, right?
Yeah, 100%. I know it's the same for a lot of people. I'm hardly alone in this, but being in the outdoors is probably the best mood regulator I've found for myself. Just the kind of the freedom of kind of being out in the wilderness, really. That sounds a bit Bear Grylls, and I don't mean it to. But yeah, I don't know what it is. I've not always been like that. It's kind of come hand in hand with an interest in photography, really, which I started when I lived in London, which is obviously a very different place to live than North Wales. But I found that the more time I spent with the camera, the more I noticed that I enjoyed being in the outdoors, and specifically being in the outdoors surrounded by more kind of sheep than people.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Well, yeah, your sort of area of where you've lived and where you're currently living is an area of the UK that I know very little about. So for me, I know I struggle with being inspired in your home sort of surroundings, and by home I mean even, to greater extent of the whole country. But I always come to your channel for some of those UK sort of countryside, sort of early morning, foggy, frosty, those types of vibes, which I feel like you do a great job of, for one thing, finding them, and also being able to document them and share them in some great images. But I want to know what your perspective is on shooting in your home areas, in your surrounding areas.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you very much. It's lovely to hear that. Um, I think often, and particularly nowadays, as kind of I hate the word influencer, but I suppose that's what some people at least would call us. And invariably, when people think of people like us, I think a lot of the time they think of people who gallivant around the world pretending to work, and showing people products and places. And I've certainly benefited from that in some ways, but I do worry sometimes that kind of shooting in some of the best places in the world to shoot doesn't necessarily improve you as a photographer. It might make you more successful because your images might garner more interest, but the reality is, does it improve you technically as a photographer? Probably not, because you don't really have to work hard for shots in the same way that you do in maybe less exotic locations. And I don't think it necessarily improves your storytelling ability as well, because quite often, if you go to a place that is renowned for good photos, often you won't be thinking about what it is you want to take photos of. You'll have a preconceived idea in your head of what it is you need to take photos of. And it'll probably end up along the lines of other photos that you've seen in the
Hmm.
past. So I think in some ways there are huge benefits to making use of whatever it is you've got around you. And I feel very lucky to live in a place that I certainly consider beautiful now. But I think also, I get a lot of messages from people, I'm sure you're the same, who say that they feel a bit trapped in where they live. They don't think where they live is particularly interesting. And as a photographer, that represents a problem. And what I typically say to those people is that wherever you are, it's completely different for some people in the world. And there will invariably be people who are very, very interested in where it is you live and the kind of life that you lead. And case in point, one of my favorite things to do when I am indoors is to go on Google Earth, and I'll just look around kind of random streets in random towns in random countries, because it's just interesting. And I do kind of wish that people had that perspective a bit more, in that, you know, there's beauty and interest and intrigue in all corners of the world, and you don't necessarily need to go to the most Instagrammed locations in the world to get good photos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that message has never been more important and never been more relevant, really, given that travel at the minute is nigh and impossible.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a huge consideration of you know, thinking that outside eyes on what is so frequent and common to you can be the narrative, that can be the sort of view of things. Much the same in so many other aspects of travel, like food, for example. You know, there are people around the world who say live in Italy, and they may not actually, no, that's a bad thing because they're passionate about food. But say like they may live somewhere and the rest of the world loves their food, but them, they're just like, nah, you know, grass is always greener on the other side. That's definitely a point for photographers. But you mentioned about exotic locations, but the thing is, you have been to some incredible locations, particularly maybe not so much exotic is the wrong word, but wintry and Arctic. That's
Yeah.
something that I feel like you've got a lot of experience in particular your Greenland trip from, I want to say that was like, what, 3 years ago now or something?
Yeah, I've been a couple of times. But kind of, yeah, 2 and 3 years ago, respectively. Which
Yeah,
is
I
bonkers.
found them
Time flies.
so inspiring. So I got an image here. This one in particular. I remember the vlog that you posted about this, and just kind of looking out at things and thinking, here's an idea, I'm gonna go and do it. And then you get there. Was that a good idea? Kind of freezing. Please come back, pick me up. Um, do you have any extra stories or like experiences about your winter and Arctic photography? Because I find that shooting in winter is 10 times more difficult in every aspect.
Yeah, yeah, I think it absolutely is. I mean, somewhere like Greenland is perhaps less tricky in my experience. I mean, I've spent a total of 3 weeks of my life there, so I'm hardly a resident. But I'd say in my experience, it's perhaps easier than a lot of kind of winter locations, on the basis that it's a very dry environment.
Hmm.
So you're not kind of battling sideways rain a lot of the time, which makes kind of winter shooting pretty dreary often, I find. But somewhere like Greenland, I'd also say, when it comes to photography, is essentially cheating. Because as I was saying, you know, regardless of where you live, there are always going to be people who live in completely different places and circumstances who will find your photos interesting. But when it comes to somewhere like Greenland, it's got such a small population and such a tiny number of people in the world live in places like that, that the vast majority of people are going to take some kind of curiosity into viewing those photos. So in that regard, it kind of is cheating to go somewhere that remote and that kind of I don't know what the right word is, but just not many people have seen images
Mm.
from some of those places. So that kind of gives you a huge leg up when it comes to creating interest in your photo.
But
But yeah,
they
you're
almost
right.
feel like it almost feels like an extra piece of gear. Like you've got an advantage by having this location as a character to your imagery.
Yeah, and I suppose that is why people will always be interested in things like travel for photography, because it does give you the potential for, as you know, a leg up, basically an advantage as soon as people look at your photos, that there is something different about them just because of where you happen to be standing.
Mm.
Um, and you don't necessarily, and I don't think you should necessarily get points for that as a photographer. Just because of where you've got off a plane, that shouldn't, and I don't think does make you any better or worse a photographer. But it can certainly make your images more impactful. And as a result, often when I take photos in places like that, I don't have the same connection with them that I do if I take a photo that I deem to be really good somewhere that's maybe not as interesting a spot,
Mm.
because chances are I've probably had to work harder for it, and I've needed to rely on kind of technical know-how
Mm-hmm.
and past inspiration a lot more than I would in a place where it's blatantly obvious what the photo is. Yeah.
The one aspect that I think you do really well in your videos of sharing is tips on how you actually plan and prepare yourself for shooting, whether that's location scouting or weather planning and just all of these extra things. How important has that been throughout your journey with photography? Is it something that you've always had a sort of keen eye towards, or have you learnt from mistakes and gone on to become better at planning?
Yeah, I'd say it's very much a secondary thing for me, planning, on the basis that I'm very lucky in what I do, in that I worked as a proper professional photographer for a short period. So I was working for paying clients. And whenever that's the case, you need to plan your shoots down to a T, because often you're working to a shot list, you're being paid for a certain number of days, and it's imperative that you complete that shot list in that number of days. And as a result, you have to plan an awful lot. Whereas now, because most of my business is based around my YouTube channel and it's kind of been built around that audience, it gives me a lot more freedom to chance it and to go out and not have to do research and to see just what I see,
Hmm.
basically. And often that means I come back home with nothing. But what it does give me the opportunity to do is to go out and come across things I didn't plan for, didn't expect. And they, in my mind, are always the photos that you're most grateful for. Um, because anytime you get a photo that you've not thought about or that you didn't think was possible, it's essentially a bonus.
Mm.
It's a free photo that could end up in your portfolio that you didn't even have to do the entire whole load of hours of
Yep.
planning for. Um, and yeah, I just find it a nicer experience to
Mm.
not have everything planned. So I guess there's a load of different ways you can approach things like location scouting. You can do it down to a T, and you can try and plan specific shots by looking at exact sunrise locations and exact sunset locations, and what kind of elevation you need to be at and what kind of cloud coverage you need for a particular shot, all that kind of thing. Right down to, you can point at a general area on a map and go, I'm going to go there today. And of the two, my absolute favorite is definitely the latter,
Yeah.
um, because it leaves room for surprises. And not all of us um, have the luxury of doing that. For a lot of us, I suppose photography is something we get to do in kind of precious downtime, and if that's the case, you want to make the most of it. So I feel very privileged that I kind of have the time to let myself have failures, I
Mm.
suppose. And the flip side of that is that, um, times that do work and times that I do get photos, it's a much bigger reward than had it all been expected and planned for. So
Yes, it's definitely a double-edged sword. It's like the gains are bigger, but the losses are bigger as well.
yeah, exactly.
It's I know the firsthand the feeling of like it's so much easier to plan things when you're doing it for someone else. Like I'm the most organized and efficient person when it comes to working on external clients and doing professional work and those types of things. But when it comes to doing it for myself, for whatever reason, I just I don't quite hold myself as accountable to it. And I'm happy to just go and visit a location and just see where the light takes me and just to follow things and be like, oh, what's around that corner? What's around there? And when you find it, you're right, you do get amazing shots from it. But when it goes wrong, you look back and you're like, oh man, that's another video that's just failed or it's not worked. Whereas if I'd taken the time to plan it properly,
Yeah.
I could have done it. But likewise, if you'd planned it too much, you can set yourself up in the complete wrong direction and restrict yourself on guidelines. So the balance is really difficult there,
Yeah.
to work with.
Yeah, it really is. It's I think you hit the nail on the head when you said double-edged sword. Because ultimately, the best stuff, whatever it is, whether it's music, art of any kind, whatever it might be, the best stuff is always organic, I think.
Mm,
And so kind of knowing that, it's I think it's advantageous whenever possible to try and kind of go with the flow as opposed to having everything planned to a T. And that's I suppose that's the biggest joy of not needing to rely on things like client work.
mm,
And I think I certainly sympathize with your point of view, and I think I'm the same when I've been doing client work in the past. You can, because the pressure's on a lot of the time, it forces you to be really meticulous. But actually, it doesn't necessarily warrant better photos. It doesn't warrant better work in any way. So yeah, I feel very lucky in how I get to approach things, and I don't know that it'll last forever, but I'm certainly enjoying it for the time being.
yeah. But with just to go back to location based, where you're working and or rather where you're living compared to where you're working and stuff, you put a lot of time and effort into scouting locations or rather going to areas and then coming back and being able to revisit them. That's something again that is quite a luxury to have, because if I was to visit, say, Snowdonia or the Lake District and other areas, I'd have to plan, say, a weekend or a few days to go and visit. And that puts so much pressure on the idea of I need to come away with something. And if the weather changes or it fails or I haven't accounted for a certain thing, you can miss out on that.
Yeah,
Whereas being in that area day in, day out allows you to, build up these ideas of, oh, here's an area that I want to shoot. And in your most recent video, actually, I really enjoyed your tip on saving your images via the idea of what the weather could be so that you can come back to. If you haven't seen that, by the way, go and check out James's channel for that. It's a simple but highly effective tip for things. And I think it really highlights the pressures that we place on photography. And it's always just about balance of going forwards and back and things. But I want to talk about some of the foggy images. So I find that like whenever I see one of your images and I get the notification on my Apple Watch pop up, I recognize immediately before I've even seen the name. I just know that that's a James image based on purely the look and the sort of there's something about the the brightness in the shadows and the attention to the contrast of not going too contrasty, but not fading your images. There's like a really distinctive look um, that I really love about your images. And we went through on Adobe Live, going through some of your editing process on this. Um, I've completely forgotten what my point was, what I was coming to about this.
I suppose I'd imagine it's just because you're so mesmerized by my images. Maybe is that what it is? That must be it. Don't answer that. I'm sure that's what it is.
It was the fog. The fog. That was what I was coming to. So when you come across locations like these, for example, amazing locations, um, but it's the fog that really sort of like drew you in. How often do you go to these locations and you get good images, but you just know that it was the weather that wasn't playing its part on that day? Is that a frequent thing, or do you find yourself just always working with what you've got, or do you want to return for specific things?
Yeah, so I suppose what I do is a mix of having particular shots or types of photos in mind, but also not getting too hooked on the idea of them. So if I go out to a place early in the morning and the shot I'd planned for won't work because the conditions are not what were forecast or what I expected, then I try not to get too downbeat about that or hung up on that. And I try to, right from the start, have a mindset of plan A and plan B. So, if I go to a place and it's not what I expected, there will invariably be a next plan in my mind so that it's not, a completely wasted trip. So that's kind of how I tackle that. But I suppose the variable for anyone who takes photos outdoors is pretty much always the weather, and learning to adapt to that, and learning how to make the most of that, regardless of whether it has kind of played out as you expected, is probably one of an outdoor photographer's kind of most important skills. And it's not something I feel like I've particularly mastered either. But what I have done is learn to not put all my eggs in one basket and accept when things don't work out, because ordinarily they don't. Most of the time you will plan for something, or you'll have an idea in your head, then it won't work out as expected. And learning how to acknowledge that, but also move on from it and make use of a trip. Even if it's taking you 2 hours in a car and you've had to set off at 4 a.m. to get somewhere for sunrise, whatever it might be, having a plan B and a plan C so that those aren't completely wasted times, and so that you don't have to spend 2 hours going back home in the car sulking, is
like
a pretty imperative
minimum
skill.
Requirement almost of, this is my baseline. Can I achieve that? And then what is the overall sort of main plan, I guess?
Exactly, yeah. And I think a lot of the time, for me, there are two kinds of photographers in the world. There are the kinds of photographers who go out to take photos, and then there are the kinds of photographers who go out to experience things and take photos of that experience. And I'd like to think I can put myself in the latter group. And what that means is that, if you put experience first, it's, a lack of photos is much less likely to ruin your day. And ultimately, particularly at the start of any photographer's journey, that's crucial, because anytime you take up a new hobby or a new interest, it's vital that, particularly the first half a dozen times, you really enjoy the process. And if that process for you is entirely results based, there's a good chance you're going to wind up being really fed up with taking photos, or the lack of taking photos, really quite quickly. So yeah, I try and kind of keep a fairly balanced view of what's possible and what's not, and kind of recognize that a lot of the time things just won't work out. And it's rare for me for things to go as planned more than kind of 30% of the time. And I suppose you learn that with experience, but that's the same for everyone. When you see a great photo from one of your favorite photographers, chances are that photographer has had to work much harder for that photo than perhaps you expect. But once you know that, and once you know that that's something that the vast majority of people go through, then it kind of becomes much easier to accept for yourself. And as far as the editing goes, I think there are two things that I am really precious of with my edits, and they are shadows and blacks. And typically what I like to do is raise shadows. I like to see detail in shadows, but I also want to retain contrast in an image. So often, if you watch any of my edits, you'll see that my shadows go up, but my blacks come down. And I don't necessarily know how common that is, but I personally love that look. So it's one that's, I suppose, fairly consistent through my images. And I guess another thing I would say, to your point of what you were talking about before, I think it's the biggest compliment in the world for somebody to say that they recognized a photo was yours before knowing it was yours. And I think for all of us, that's absolutely something to strive for. And it's not easy, particularly when you start out, to kind of develop a style, and it does take years. And I remember when I started trying to find out, is there a blog post that can tell me how to develop your style? Is there a kind of a magic pill?
Yeah.
the reality is that you just need to take tens of thousands of photos, hundreds of thousands, and over time you'll find out what you like to look at, and ultimately that's what you should be taking photos of. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And that style will continue to change as well. You just, you may be known for something now, but as things evolve and you grow as a creative. But to go back actually to starting out on things, I got two questions on this. First of all, if it wasn't for photography that you're doing now and having your YouTube channel and putting your work out, what do you think you would be doing? Or what would you be doing with your photography if it wasn't for the channel?
oh, good question. uh, Having a YouTube channel has completely changed the way I do everything, I think, because as I said, it's kind of freed up um, my time in that I have a lot more leeway to say no to things that I don't want to do now than I used to. And I can kind of um, put those YouTube videos kind of front and center in my priorities, which ultimately means putting my personal photos front and center. You know, I don't need to go and take photos that I don't want to take. Everything is about exactly what I want to do, and that's
Mm.
incredibly liberating. And as you well know, it's not particularly easy. You know, people a lot of the time say, "Oh, you know, surely it's not too difficult to make a video a week or whatever it might be." And the reality is that technically, it's not really. Like a video will take me
Yeah, true.
a day and a half or 2 days in a week, which leaves obviously 3 of the working days. So that's not the difficult bit. What I find difficult when it comes to making videos is that with a photo, I won't do anything with it until I'm 98% happy with it.
Mm.
And you'll never have a perfect photo. You'll never think there is literally nothing that could be better about that. But with a video, your tolerance for perfection has to be so much lower,
Mm.
because otherwise you'd never put anything live. And so I've never had a video that I've been completely happy with that I put live. But as the saying goes, done is better than perfect.
Hmm.
And that's kind of been a lesson for me as someone who kind of strives to make things as perfect as possible when it comes to my main interest. You know, when you have a YouTube channel and you set yourself kind of deadlines vaguely, um, there's a pressure and a concern of putting things out there into the world that you're not entirely happy with. And that's been something to contend with and grapple with. But in terms of what it's done for my photography, what it's meant is that I can work on pretty much exclusively the kinds of photos I want to work on. And that is, yeah, that's a blessing, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, having a YouTube channel was the best thing that I did for my photography because it was a way of getting my images out to audiences on a platform that exists and that has a huge audience base. And also, it allowed me to become kind of more intentional and accountable to myself of I'm going out to take images and I'm going to document the process and bring people along and likewise bring myself along for that. So yeah, I really feel for, adding that YouTube channel as being a huge success to it. But to go back to starting out on things, I remember coming across your work a few years ago and you were doing a lot of the composite images and work. Um, the way that I interpreted these are they're sort of you playing and getting, as what we were saying earlier, of trying to find your style and learning your skills and stuff. Is that a right interpretation of these?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of born out of not knowing what to do with myself at weekends while my then girlfriend, now wife, Emily, was doing a master's. So I was kind of sitting in our flat wondering what to do with myself and realizing that I probably shouldn't be going to the pub every weekend. And I just got a camera. I got myself a camera, and I'd kind of had a little bit of experience at that point with taking photos. Emily and I had done some trips around the world, and I'd kind of vaguely got into taking photos and and kind of serious photography at that point, I suppose. But then when we moved to London and I had all these weekends free, I was quite keen to kind of take that step further. But as you well know, kind of being in a city the size of London, trying to get original photos in a city of nearly 10 million people is really, really difficult and requires an awful lot of skill. And I didn't particularly have the patience for that. I was a bit gutted's not the word, but the realization that I couldn't just pick up a camera from day one and take photos that looked better than other photos I was seeing was just ridiculous. And I kind of wanted photography to be a creative outlet for me. Like I tried my hand at writing. You know, I had a couple of blogs. Once upon a time, I wanted to be a journalist. And I kind of saw photography as another opportunity to kind of have some kind of creative expression, but not being able to be original from day one when I picked up a camera was really frustrating. So eventually I came across a photographer called Eric Johansson, Swedish guy who does lots of incredibly clever composite work. And he will spend, I mean, I want to pluck a figure out the air that I've read somewhere. Maybe, I want to say 250 hours, something along those lines on an image.
Wow.
And if you haven't checked out his work, I'd recommend you do so. It's incredible. But I saw that and simultaneously discovered layer masking in Photoshop. And that kind of opened my eyes to an opportunity to strive for original photos without really having all that much experience with photography. And in some ways that was a cheat, I suppose. You know, I bypassed the 10,000 hours ish it would take to become proficient in creating compelling images in a single frame by combining stuff from multiple frames. And I suppose looking back, that was it was a move that worked out really well for me because it gave me lots of exposure before I probably deserved it from a technical standpoint as a photographer. It kind of gave me the energy and the inspiration to kind of run around the city chasing ideas. And all the time I was doing that, I had a camera in my hand. So, and I think that kind of work kind of fizzled out really as I started working on a YouTube channel, because the YouTube channel became that creative outlet. Right. And then over time, you know, I was honing my photography skills all the time. And then eventually I got to a point where I felt like normal photography could be a creative outlet for me, because I felt like my experience had gotten to a point where that was possible. So
did you struggle with audiences who were looking for more of the composite work and then you stopped doing it? Were they no longer interested, or did you find that you brought along people into this sort of more traditional style of photography?
Yeah, I don't know. So I suppose only a few months into having the YouTube channel, I kind of, my interest in that waned. Primarily, I think because, again, you know all this, but making a video typically requires hours of sitting at a computer editing. And when I was editing all those videos and at the same time spending hours and hours editing a single composite image, that was all my time gone, and all of it was at a desk. And as you touched on before, kind of, I love being in the outdoors, and I kind of realized that something had to give, I suppose. So that naturally led me to kind of more conventional photography, which, as it happened, I'd started to enjoy more around about that time. Anyway, so, I mean, I suppose that kind of chain of events is a case in point that of what you said before, you know, that your style as it stands right now probably won't be your style. You know, it will change, could change to completely different genres or completely different hobbies or interests entirely. I suppose you just have to go with the flow and try and enjoy each step as you go.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
sounds a bit whimsical, but
That's
yeah,
one of those fancy Instagram quotes.
yeah. Maybe I should get
Whimsical
a
thoughts
neon
from James
sign.
Popsys.
Yeah, a neon sign just back here with that as an idea.
There's
Or I
actually,
could paint that in the wall before the next coat of paint.
there we go. There's your brief. There's actually a question in here on the chat of if you can only pick 3 countries to photograph for the rest of your lives, what would that be? I'm assuming that's directed at both of us, but I'll let you go first on that.
Oh wow.
I'm going to let you go first because I'm going to take time to think of the 3.
Well, I know one of yours. Uh,
It's a tricky one because I'm sure you're probably thinking of trips that you've been on, but also trips that you maybe didn't get enough time on that you want to go back to. That's how I'm thinking of it
yeah,
as well.
yeah. I'd say Wales because I live here, and I think, I mean, it's an incredible place, but it's not as easy to take photos here as it is in some other places. Partly because of what can be quite hostile weather, and partly because it's not quite as dramatic as
Mm.
some other spots. Um, and that can be great for kind of honing skills,
Hmm.
particularly when it's just kind of on your doorstep. So I'd say Wales, one. Can I cheat slightly and rather than give a country, can I say an area which is the Alps, which I
Oh,
suppose encompasses
yeah.
Switzerland, France, Italy. So there, I'd love to spend more time there. I think it's just a phenomenal part of the world.
Mm.
And finally, I'd be tempted to say New Zealand, but it's very similar to Wales. So I'd probably go with um, Greenland, I suppose.
Hmm. I've just thrown up
Yeah.
here. This is the Matterhorn, right, from Switzerland.
Yes. What a mountain. That just looks ridiculous, doesn't it?
It's just cartoon mountain. It's
Yeah.
pure. Ask a child to draw a mountain, and they'll either draw this
Yeah.
or Mount Fuji. It's just so triangular and perfect, right? It's
Yeah. In
amazing.
fact, just yesterday on my YouTube recommended videos popped up a guy breaking a record to climb that. I think he did it in about an hour and a half or something
Oh my
stupid.
god! Wow.
It's, I mean, it's vertical on pretty much every side. It scared the hell out of me. But that's one of those things that's so much better to watch via a GoPro than actually doing it yourself.
Mm. So
So yeah, they would be mine. What would yours be? Yeah.
my 3. So of course Japan is in there. I'm endlessly inspired to go shooting in Japan, and I'm desperate to return. Um, and I would also add in New Zealand. New Zealand to me just has the perfect sort of combination of great outdoors, dramatic landscape, a variety of climate as well. So I was surprised when we were there the first time just how tropical at times it can be. And yeah, the heat in the summer and the cold in the winter. It's such a dramatic difference, and culturally as well. I love it in New Zealand so much. And my third one, which I'm still kind of struggling with, and I'm probably going to chop and change as it comes around, but I'm probably going to stick with somewhere like Taiwan. Similar vibes to Japan, but different culturally. Um, yeah, I fell in love with the location and the people and just the vibe there. It really ticks a lot of boxes for me, photography wise. Yeah, that's for
Well,
sure.
it sounds like you'll be keeping the airlines in business when things pick back up again.
Yeah, I hope so. It's yeah, waiting for the days. I will just mask up and tape my face and hold my breath for 12 hours.
Yeah. Well, I remember watching your New Zealand videos from the trip that you guys did and absolutely loved them. I think
Well,
that
of
can't have
course,
been
you
long
were
after I found.
in Australia similar time when when we were living there.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and that
such a
was
fun experience.
yeah, and I remember watching your videos at that time as well. So that was 15, 2016, something like that. And at the
Mm.
time, you were making quite a few videos that were kind of tech hauls,
Hmm.
where you'd kind of found lots of like really intriguing little gadgets, and you were kind of showing off your new ones. I loved those videos, and I also loved. You were definitely the person who inspired me to get one of those label makers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They're fantastic, yeah. Although I've not
Everything's
found,
labeled.
yeah, the best use of that I've found is my recycling bin, which isn't that exciting. So I'll have to find some better uses for those labels because it is a great little machine.
So there's just another question in here. So if you could only use one camera and one lens going forward, what would your combo be?
Oh, that's really tricky. I'd probably say my Lumix G9, which is a micro four thirds camera. So it's not a low light machine in any shape or form, but ergonomically um, and just in terms of its feature set, it suits me perfectly. In terms of a lens, oh, I'd probably say something. So there's a 14 to 140, I think it is, in
Mm.
micro four thirds, which works out as being a 28 to 280, does it? Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite
Um,
a range. Yeah.
yeah. So kind of a lens that wouldn't win any awards for sharpness, certainly wouldn't win any awards for um, kind of shallow depth of field, creamy bokeh,
Hmm.
but it would cover all my bases. And I use a huge variety of focal lengths, kind of being out in the mountains. So I couldn't really get by. I mean, I could get by, but I wouldn't enjoy the experience of missing um, huge chunks of potential focal lengths.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd have to have a lens that pretty much covered all the bases at the expense of performance in other ways, I think. How
Mm.
about you?
Yeah, see, I'm torn. The thing with choosing a camera is that in a few years they do become outdated. Whereas a
Yeah.
lens, like talking in a focal length, that's definitely a great way to look at things. And I think a focal length for me, for photography anyway, I love sitting around the prime range of a 35 to 50 mil, that sort of area, depending on what sensor size you're on. Um, I find that capturing things that my eyes see, but just cropping it by the dimensions really, I don't know, it just sits well with me. I really enjoy that. Um, Camera wise though, my answer, it fluctuates so much. I would either be torn between whatever Fuji's latest is at the time of answering this, which I guess would be the X-T4, or it would be something like a Canon R5, which I'm loving for photo and video,
Okay.
covering sort of all my bases on things. But that being said, the size and weight of it is potentially not something I would have with me all the time. So I probably would still be drawn more towards something like an X-T4, I guess. Um,
Have you got any interest in film?
yes, definitely. It's been a long time since I've shot film, and it gets longer and longer every time I say that. It's something I definitely want to return to doing. I shot a lot of film, and my college actually had a dark room, like a purpose-built thing in a brand new build, actually, which was very surprising because it was built only 2 years before I actually went, and they decided to include a dark room. So I maximized that and really enjoyed spending time in the lab and enlarging images and going through the whole process of everything. Um, but since then, I've not really done any sort of analog photography. I'd love to. I love the images that come out of film photography. There's still such a character and quality that just isn't matched by digital. And even last week, looking over Vince's work on the stream, and every single image I was just looking at, it's like, man, I want to shoot analog again. It's been so
Hmm.
long. It's just, I think I'm terrified by the process of it. There's so much extra sort of workflow and time that's required for things.
Yeah,
Um, but again, once you get started, you'll probably be fine with going through on it.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's kind of it really intrigues me, but it's for some reason it's never intrigued me enough for me to kind of pull the trigger and invest in a system and trial a load of different films and take a look at scanners and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's I do love watching other people do it, that's for sure.
Mm, yeah, definitely. Um, all right, we are coming up just onto time on things. I'm trying to keep this as a concise thing. I know we had some technical difficulties at the start, but the idea of these streams is to have like a 45-minute or so conversation around things. So James, I just want to say thank you for joining today, and thanks for everyone who's watched. And if anyone's come over from James's channel, then hey there, welcome. And yeah, this has definitely been a fun one, and hopefully we can do it again sometime soon with less technical difficulties.
But yeah, let's hope at some point we can do something face to face. That'd be nice.
Oh man, we've been saying that
We,
for how long now? It's
yeah, let's dream the dream.
maybe this summer. The lockdown lifts very soon in England. I know Wales is ahead of the curve a little bit with restrictions and things. So hopefully, as the weather gets better, um, yeah, we can go and see some North Wales. I'd love to get to know that through your guided mind.
Sounds good. You're always welcome.
All right, cool. Well, we will end that there, and thanks for joining everyone, and we'll catch you in another one real soon. All right, here is where
So,
the technical difficulties go wrong.
take care, everyone.
See ya. Bye bye.